In the late spring of 1978, on the dry edge of Baca County, Colorado, a 42-year-old farmer named Russell Hartley did something that made the whole town slow down when they passed his place. He planted millet, not wheat, like every serious dryland farmer around Springfield was planting, not corn, not barley, not anything the bankers liked seeing on a loan sheet. Millet. A short, stubborn grain most of his neighbors thought of as chicken feed, birdseed, or the kind of crop a man put in the ground when he had already stopped hoping. Russell planted 180 acres of it. By the second week of May, everyone knew. Everyone knew. At the parts counter, men repeated it with their hats pushed back. At the cafe, waitresses herded over coffee. At church, even the women who never gossiped somehow found a way to mention it. Russell Hartley has lost his nerve. He is putting birdseed on wheat ground. Somebody ought to stop him before he embarrasses his family. The loudest voice belonged to Wayne Kincaid, the local implement dealer. Wayne sold combines, seed drills, parts, grease, belts, and opinions. He had known Russell since they were boys, and he drove out one morning because he wanted to see the foolishness with his own eyes. He found Russell on an old Alice Chalmers tractor, putting a drill through a field that should have been green with wheat stubble and promise. Instead, it was being opened in careful lines for a crop nobody respected. Wayne waved him down. Russell killed the engine. Dust drifted past them in the thin wind. Wayne looked at the field and laughed, but not kindly. "You really are doing it." Russell climbed off the tractor and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Morning, Wayne." "Don't morning me. What is this?" "Millet." "I know what millet looks like. I'm asking why." Russell turned and looked across the rows. The field rolled away into the flat distance, brown and open and waiting. "My granddad left instructions." Wayne stared at him. "Your granddad has been in the cemetery since 1949. "I know." "And you're taking planting advice from a dead man?" Russell smiled a little. "Only because the living ones keep repeating each other." Wayne shook his head. "Wheat is paying. Wheat is what this ground is for. Millet is what you feed to parakeets." Russell put one boot on the tractor step. "Maybe." "Maybe?" "Russell, the bank doesn't take maybe. Your wife can't buy groceries with maybe. Your kids can't wear maybe to school." Russell looked back once more at the field. "No. Can't eat a dead wheat crop either." Wayne's smile faded. There was a moment between them, a small one, but sharp. Wayne had come to laugh. Russell had answered like a man who had already had the argument somewhere else, with someone who was not present. Wayne finally pointed at the seed drill. "You keep this up, they'll start calling you Birdseed Russell." Russell started the tractor. "They can call me whatever they want." Then he lowered the drill back into the ground and drove on. The reason Russell did it was not courage at first. It was a box. Not a grand wooden trunk, not a treasure chest, nothing romantic. A dented blue kerosene can with a wire handle and a lid that had been hammered flat so many times it barely closed. He found it that March, inside the north wall of his father's granary. A windstorm had come through hard enough to peel tin off the roof and shove tumbleweeds against the fences like livestock. Russell spent the next morning patching damage. One loose board in the granary wall would not sit right. When he pried it free, the kerosene can slid out from behind it and hit the floor with a dull sound. Inside were three things: a cloth sack full of seed labels from the 1930s, a cracked pair of spectacles, and feed sack paper. The ledger belonged to Russell's grandfather, Silas Hartley. Silas had farmed that same land when the sky turned black in the Dust Bowl years. He had been there when dust came under doors, through window cracks, into beds, onto supper plates, into children's lungs. He had watched wheat fields vanish, not because men failed to work, but because the land had been asked to give more than weather would allow. Silas had tried wheat in 1932. He tried again in 1933. He borrowed to plant in 1934, because everyone said a good rain had to come soon. By 1935, he had written one sentence across the top of a page in pencil, so hard it tore the paper, wind blowing her hair loose. "Russell?" He looked up, holding the ledger like something alive. She saw his face and stepped inside. "What happened?" He handed her the book. "My granddad wrote us a map." Clara frowned and read the last page. When she finished, she looked back at him, then at the seed labels scattered on the floor. "This is about the Dust Bowl." "Yes. That was 40 years ago." Russell nodded. "The ground is the same ground. Farming is different now. The bank is different. The tractors are different. The crop insurance forms are different." He tapped the ledger. "The plant still needs water." Clara looked toward the open door, where loose dust ran across the yard like smoke. "We had a dry winter. That doesn't mean another disaster is coming." "No," Russell said, "it doesn't." He closed the ledger gently. "But Silas didn't say to plant after we know. He said after we know is too late." That night, Russell spread the ledger open on the kitchen table. He compared the old notes with his own field records. He marked the lowest ground, the wind-scoured corners, the places where snow had not held the previous winter. He pulled county rainfall sheets from a drawer. He wrote numbers in the margins until after midnight. Clara made coffee and watched him work. Finally, she asked the question she had been circling all evening. "How much?" Russell did not look up. 180 acres. She closed her eyes. "That is not an experiment." "No. That is half our good ground." "I know. And if the year turns wet, then people will laugh." Clara sat across from him. "And if it doesn't?" Russell ran his thumb along the torn edge of Silas's warning. "Then maybe our children keep their home." By sunrise, the decision had already settled inside him. That is how Russell Hartley became a joke. In 1978, his wheat-growing neighbors had a decent year. Not spectacular, but decent. The kind of year that makes a man comfortable enough to insult another man's caution. Russell's millet paid less. It covered seed, fuel, and a little more. The elevator manager had to check 2 county sheets just to price it. Wayne Kincaid laughed the first time Russell brought it in. "Birdseed, Russell," he said. "You planning to farm or open a pet store?" Men laughed behind him. Russell only signed the ticket. In 1979, he planted millet again. The jokes became easier because now they had rhythm. Russell's growing canary feed. Maybe he's farming for pigeons. Maybe old Silas is running the place from the grave. His oldest daughter, Annie, came home from school one afternoon and threw her book bag against the wall. Clara turned from the sink. What happened? Annie's eyes were wet, but angry. Lane Kincaid said Daddy is going to lose the farm because he's too scared to plant a real crop. Russell had been sitting at the table with the ledger open. He looked at Annie, then at the bruise of humiliation on her face. What did you say? I told him at least our tractor isn't paid for by talking. Clara almost smiled, but Russell did not. He pulled out a chair. Sit down. Annie sat, still breathing hard. Russell turned the ledger toward her. This is your great-grandfather's hand. For the next half hour, he read to her about 1935, about noon skies dark as night, about men tying ropes between the house and barn so they would not lose their way in their own yard, about families leaving with mattresses tied to cars, about Silas putting millet in dry ground while people called him foolish. Annie touched the page. Was he right? He was alive to write this, wasn't he? She looked down. But what if they're right about you? Russell leaned back. Then I'll look foolish for a few years. And if you're right? He looked through the kitchen window toward the fields. Then foolish is a cheap price. By 1980, the nickname stuck. Birdseed Russell. Men said it at the co-op, at the elevator, at auctions, over coffee. Some said it with affection. Some said it with contempt. Most said it because people enjoy a joke that costs them nothing. Russell paid for that joke every season. He paid in lower returns when wheat did well. He paid in the tight look Clara got when bills came due. He paid when he said no to a newer combine. He paid when his children learned that grown men could turn caution into entertainment. And still, every spring, he planted millet. Not all his acres. He was not reckless. He kept some wheat, some barley, some pasture. But he held that 180 acres like a line he would not cross backward. Then the weather changed. It did not change like a movie. There was no single terrible day when everyone understood. The winter of 1980 came up thin, not alarming, just thin. The spring of 1981 arrived with wind and promises. Clouds built in the west, then broke apart before they reached the fields. Men stood outside the cafe looking at the sky and saying, "Next week." Next week became next week again. By June, the wheat began to tell the truth before the men did. Leaves curled. Heads came up short. Fields that should have rolled green under the sun turned the color of old rope. By July, the wind had a taste to it. Dry metal, dust, heat. Russell drove the county roads in silence, seeing what Silas had described. Not exactly the full black blizzards of the 30s, but enough. Enough to make the ledger feel less like history and more like a voice speaking from the passenger seat. He passed Wayne Kincaid's dealership and saw the lot full of equipment nobody was buying. He passed the Barnes place and saw wheat so thin you could count rows at 40 miles an hour. He passed the Mason brothers' fields and saw the sick, pale shimmer of a crop using up its last strength. Then he turned down his own road. His millet was hurting. He did not pretend otherwise. The leaves were rolled tight in the afternoon. The plants were shorter than he wanted. The stand had gaps where the poorest soil had given up. But the field was alive. Low, gray-green, stubborn, alive. Russell parked by the fence and stood there with both hands on the wire. Clara came up beside him a few minutes later. She had seen him from the house. Neither of them spoke at first. Finally she said, "Is this what he meant?" Russell nodded. His throat worked before the words came. This is what he meant. By harvest, the county had stopped joking. The wheat crop across that part of southeastern Colorado was a wreck. Some farmers got half of what they expected. Some got less than a quarter. Some cut fields only because leaving them standing felt worse. The elevator, usually crowded with trucks and dust and men shouting over engines, sat strangely quiet. Then Russell pulled in with his first load of millet. The new elevator manager, a young man named Earl Voss, came out holding a clipboard. "You got millet?" Russell stepped down from the truck. "I do." Earl looked at the grain, then at Russell. "I haven't bought much of this. Better find your sheet." Earl did. The price was better than anyone expected. Feed yards were hunting for anything they could use. Hay was short. Pastures were burned. Wheat yields were down all over the region. Grain that had been mocked as birdseed suddenly had buyers calling from 2 states away. Russell's yield was not beautiful. But beauty was not the question anymore. He brought in just over 5,000 bushels from the acres people had laughed at. The check did not make him rich. It made him solvent. That year, solvent looked like a miracle. Wayne Kincaid came to the elevator while Russell's second truck was unloading. For once, he did not enter with a joke already loaded. He stood there watching the grain pour. Finally he said, "I guess birdseed spends." Russell looked at him. "It feeds, too." Wayne took off his cap and wiped his forehead. "How did you know?" Russell did not answer quickly. He could have said he studied rainfall. He could have said he watched the wind. He could have said he was smarter than they were. Instead he said, "Silas wrote it down. I believed him before it was convenient." The next year was worse. That is the part people forget in stories about being ready. They imagine the test arrives once, proves the lesson, and leaves. The land does not work that way. The winter of 1981 brought almost no mercy. The spring of 1982 came dusty. Men who had laughed at Russell now tried to buy millet seed, but the seed was scarce. Some planted too late. Some planted without changing drill plates, treated it like wheat, and then blamed the crop when it disappointed them. Russell had seed. Russell had notes. Russell had 3 years of small mistakes already behind him. His millet survived again. This time the check was larger, because prices had climbed, and buyers were desperate. He paid the operating note before the banker even asked. He bought no new truck. He bought no new house furniture. He put the money in reserve because the ledger had taught him something deeper than crop choice. The drought does not just test what a man plants. It tests what he owes. By late 1982, the first farms started to come apart. The Barnes family sold 80 acres to cover debt. Mason brothers split their operation and still could not save it. Men who had once joked about Russell began parking outside Wayne Kincaid's dealership with their caps in their hands, trying to delay payments on machinery they had bought during good wheat years. Wayne stopped laughing altogether. His backlot filled with repossessed equipment. Paint still bright, seats barely worn, engines that had not failed. Only the assumptions had failed. In February of 1983, Russell went to Wayne's office. The showroom smelled like rubber tires and stale coffee. Wayne sat behind the desk, looking older than a man should look after 2 dry years. "Come to collect your apology?" Wayne asked. "Should look after 2 dry years." "Come to collect your apology?" Wayne asked. "No." Russell took off his gloves. "I came about the Barnes 80. Wayne blinked. "You want to buy it?" "If the bank will sell fair." Wayne leaned back. "Russell, that is good ground, even hurt. They won't give it away. I'm not asking them to. You have that kind of cash?" Russell pulled a folded bank statement from his coat and laid it on the desk. Wayne opened it. His face changed slowly. For a long time he did not speak. Then he said, "Millet did this?" Russell shook his head. "Listening did this." Wayne stared at the numbers. "I called you birdseed, Russell." "You did. I said it in front of your boy once." "I remember." Wayne swallowed. "I'm sorry." Russell took the statement back. "I didn't come for sorry." "What did you come for?" "Help me make the offer clean. No auction circus, no pressure on Barnes. A fair price, cash, and they keep the house through summer." Wayne studied him. "You could get it cheaper if you waited." "I know." "Then why not?" Russell looked through the showroom window at the rows of idle equipment. "Because I know what it means to watch a family lose ground. My granddad wrote that down, too." Wayne nodded once, ashamed and relieved at the same time. "I'll call the bank." Russell bought the Barnes 80. Then another piece the next year. Then a quarter section from a man moving to Pueblo. By 1986, the Hartley farm had grown to nearly 700 acres. Not because Russell had been ruthless, because he had been ready when the price of unpreparedness came due. But the part of the story that mattered most did not happen at the bank. It happened at Russell's kitchen table. After the second brutal year, farmers started coming to him at night. Not in groups at first. Pride would not allow that. One at a time. A pickup would crunch into the yard after supper. A man would step onto the porch, look at his boots, and ask if Russell had a minute. Russell always had a minute. He showed them Silas's ledger. He showed them his own notes in a school notebook beside it. He explained drill settings, planting windows, residue cover, which fields punished Millet, and which fields rewarded it. He told them not to worship one crop, because that was just another kind of foolishness. He talked about diversity, debt, seed reserves, and the danger of confusing a good market with a permanent climate. One farmer, a proud man named Ed Larkin, finally asked what many had wondered. "Why didn't you just tell us in 78? Russell looked at him across the table. "I did." Ed frowned. "No, you planted. That's different." Russell tapped the ledger. "My granddad wrote the warning and hid it in a wall. My father never read it. I found it by accident. A warning is only useful to the person willing to feel foolish before the proof arrives." Ed sat with that. Russell softened his voice. "If I'd stood in the cafe in 1978 and said the next dry cycle was coming, what would you have done?" Ed looked down. Probably laughed louder. "Yes." Russell closed the ledger. "That's why I didn't try to win an argument. I tried to keep my family ready. Over time, the nickname changed. Birdseed Russell became the man to ask, then the man to follow. By the early 1990s, dryland farmers across the county were planting differently. Not all millet, not all anything. Not all anything. They were rotating more carefully, carrying less debt, leaving more cover on the soil, and keeping seed for hard years, instead of assuming every season would resemble the last profitable one. In 1994, the County Historical Museum asked Russell to loan Silas's ledger for a Dust Bowl exhibit. Russell agreed on one condition. He wanted to add a page. He sat at the same kitchen table where he had first read the warning to Clara and wrote in block letters because his hands had grown stiff. This ledger was written by Silas Hartley after the dry years that nearly took this farm. He learned what the land would teach any man who would listen. The crop that makes you proud in a wet year can ruin you in a dry one. I found these pages in 1978 behind the wall of the old granary. That spring I planted millet on ground my neighbors said deserved wheat. They laughed and called me Birdseed Russell. For 3 years, the joke cost me money. Then the sky tightened. The wheat failed across the county. Millet did not make me a genius. It made me ready. Readiness saved the farm. If these pages find another Hartley, or any farmer after me, remember this. Do not wait for disaster to make old wisdom fashionable. By then, everyone believes, and belief is no longer enough. Plant for the season that has not arrived yet. Russell Hartley. October 1994. The museum placed Silas's page and Russell's page side by side. Visitors stood in front of them longer than expected. Maybe because it was not really a display about millet. It was about timing. About the strange cruelty of wisdom. It looks foolish right up until the moment it looks obvious. Russell farmed into his 70s. He slowed down only when his knees stopped trusting ladders, and his sons refused to let him climb grain bins alone. When he died in 2003, the church in Springfield filled before the service began. Farmers stood along the walls. Men who had once mocked him came in quiet, wearing cleaned boots and good shirts. Wayne Kincaid sat near the back, older, smaller, holding his hat with both hands. Annie gave the eulogy. She was grown by then, with children of her own, and she placed Silas's ledger on the pulpit before she spoke. My father was not saved by millet, she said. People looked up. He was saved by humility. Millet was just the form humility took that year. She opened the ledger. My great-grandfather survived the Dust Bowl because he learned from pain. My father survived the next dry years because he learned from my great-grandfather. Neither of them was popular when the lesson first appeared. Both of them were called foolish. Both of them were right early, which is the loneliest kind of right. The church stayed silent. Annie looked toward the back pews. My father could have used what he knew to get ahead of everyone. He could have watched neighbors fail and bought everything cheap. Instead, he shared the ledger. He taught the men who laughed at him. He believed land was not just property. It was memory. And memory is wasted if it only protects one family. She touched the page Russell had added. When people asked Dad how he knew, he never said, I knew. He said, Silas wrote it down. That was Dad's greatness, difference between being smart and being willing to listen. The Hartley farm still runs today. Russell's grandson manages it now. They grow wheat, millet, sorghum, and hay. They keep cattle when the grass allows it and sell down when it does not. They keep debt low. They save seed. They leave stubble standing through winter, even when a clean field would look prettier from the road. And every March, before planting decisions are final, the family gathers at the kitchen table. The ledger comes out, Silas's torn pages, Russell's block letter warning, rainfall sheets, soil notes. Too young to understand still hear the words, because the Hartleys learned that wisdom must be repeated before it is needed. The lesson is not that millet is magic. The lesson is that the crowd usually prepares for the season it just enjoyed. The wise prepare for the one everyone has forgotten. Russell Hartley planted the wrong seed while his neighbors laughed. He planted it before the sky closed, before the prices changed, before the proof was visible from the road. And when the dry years came, the wrong seed was the only thing in the county that still knew how to live. That is how a dead man's ledger saved a living family. That is how ridicule turned into respect. That is how ridicule turned into respect. And that is why, when everyone around you is planting for applause, you had better have the courage to plant for survival.